All right, it looks like it's noon, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Remote Learning Week. This is our second breakout session of the week. We had a great session yesterday with Eric Geis talking all about digital equity and student engagement during remote learning. Today, we will be talking with Sean Coffron about communication, collaboration, and coaching tactics for remote learning. Just want to give you all a breakdown of this week's schedule. You probably have already seen it in the Facebook group since that is how you're joining today. But tomorrow, we'll be talking with Sarah Margison about teaching tactics for remote learning. And then on Thursday, we'll be talking with Melanie Lejeune about technology tools to help you with remote learning. At the end of this week, also, we'll be having a Dyknow Focus Summit on Friday to talk a little more about the Dyknow product, how we facilitate remote learning and help support you during this time of remote learning. More details will be released on that soon. Excuse me, but we want to jump in today to our topic. So today we're going to be talking about communication, collaboration, and coaching tactics for remote learning. The reason that we're hosting these breakout sessions is because when we initially announced the Remote Learning Summit and asked everyone for audience questions, we received over 300 questions, which was amazing, but we were not able to cover all of those questions in the hour and a half that we initially had. So we wanted to kind of take these different categories of questions that we received and host breakout sessions with each of our panelists to dive a little deeper into each of these topics. So today I'm joined by Sean Coffron, and he's going to be talking with us, answering the questions that you submitted about communication, collaboration, and coaching tactics. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I also want to let everyone know that this is being recorded. We'll be posting it this afternoon in the TechCoachCon Facebook group for you all to watch. At the end of this week as well, we'll be sharing certificates of attendance for anyone who joined these breakout sessions, so that you can mark off which ones you attended and get PD credit if you can through your school or district. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. I hope everyone can see Sean and I. Hi, Sean. How are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. So we're excited to have you today. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation with us. I think it's going to be a really great conversation. We received a lot of really good questions from the audience about communication, collaboration, and coaching tactics. So just to kind of start diving in, can you talk to me a little bit about how your kind of communication and collaboration strategies have changed during this remote learning time, and how it might look different now than it did with face-to-face learning before kind of everything happened?
Sure. So I think one of the most important things to do when you're faced with this type of environment is to try to replicate as much as possible the face-to-face experience. I think it's crucial that the people that we're serving feel like we are still present and we're still there to help them. We need to be mindful of their struggles as well and their experiences, so that when we're providing them with support, we can do so in a way that meets their needs, but also meets the needs of the larger community, by giving them good strategies to reach out to their students and to provide instruction. I think one of the main differences has been actually kind of a positive, because it's given teachers a chance to experience that extra learning space that we keep speaking of when we talk about using blended learning strategies in the classroom. There's been a little bit of a learning curve with some of my colleagues in using Zoom and using some of the other features that we use through our learning management system to provide coaching support and also training. Professional development is a little bit different for us, and so we maintain our Zoom presence, and also we use some of the resources we have, such as Nearpod. But in terms of the difference in the relationship and the difference in the way it's presented or manifests in terms of the day-to-day conversations, it's pretty much the same. The nice thing is we have that rapport already in place, because we had the benefit of almost a full school year to establish that relationship. And I think that's crucial. I think when you're providing coaching or different levels of training support, it's vital that the technology not get in the way of the message, that this teacher or the student still feel like you are there for them and still feel like they're being supported. One of the other big differences has been I've been given a little bit of a different experience with coaching, because I can provide some digital experience or some digital conversation, but I can also do things over text, you know, through email or through support of that nature. And rather than sitting around a table and handing them papers and, you know, walking through and saying, hey, here's a guide that you can use, we're doing that digitally now. So I have a library of resources that I've created and that the team has created, and we've been sharing that with colleagues. And it's interesting because we go back and forth, but in some ways it's a little more efficient because we're talking and I go ahead and share my screen or I share a document with them, and they can manipulate it directly on their computer. So in that regard, it's been a little more efficient.
Would you say you're doing more, I guess, hands-on training and kind of walking people through those steps and integration processes more than maybe when you were handing out those handouts or guides for how to do something with technology?
Right, absolutely. I think so. The hours that I'm putting in are about the same, but the function of my role in the community is different. So traditionally, I would be engaging in PD, engaging in training sessions and coaching sessions, and also spending a considerable amount of time in classrooms working side by side with teachers and co-teaching or helping students to work through different technology issues. That time that I was spending in the classroom serving as a co-teacher or serving as, you know, technical support for a student, and I know both roles are very different, but in both cases it was time consuming, and that time is now really being spent more with teachers. And so I would say that a lot of the support that I'm providing is really just a retooling of my hours in the day. I don't find myself spending 10 or 12 hours on the computer, 10 or 12 hours working from home. And that's kind of a good thing. I'm sure my wife and kids really like that. But what I will say is the efficiency of the experience on the digital learning or on digital support is really allowing me to serve more students, serve more teachers, and just change the role that I have in the community.
That's really interesting how much your role has changed. One question we got, so I'm going to kind of jump into some of the questions we received that relate to communication and collaboration. An interesting question that we got was how to keep distance learning simple. So I would encourage you to talk about keeping it simple both for teachers from a coaching perspective, and then maybe how teachers can keep it simple for students from a teaching perspective.
Right. It's a very good question because in a lot of cases, and actually I have a graphic that I share with people that has, you know, 20 or 30 technology tools that we have available to us. And it seems that right now, all these different tech firms and all these different technology resources are shouting from the rafters, use us, we're wonderful, we're great remote learning resources. And unfortunately, amid that cloud, it can become very confusing and very difficult to navigate, especially if you're a teacher that may not be as familiar with those resources, or if you're a student who believes that they are very digitally savvy when in fact they're just very savvy on their phones with social media. So I think in both cases, I think the first thing to do is to help to demystify what is digital learning and help people to understand that it's more than just the tech tools. I encourage teachers to continue to use the resources they always used. And in fact, if a teacher has, for example, used the learning management system that we have in the past, I'll say that we use Schoology. So, but of course, oh, hello, Kat. But Schoology could be just any other learning management system, whether it be Canvas or something else that's out there. Excuse me.
No, you're fine.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Kitty. Okay, so anyway, learning management system. If I'm in a learning management system environment and I use my LMS in the classroom, I think it's okay to continue to use that LMS. However, I think it's very difficult to try to do something new. So if I hear about this new really cool thing called Nearpod, and I've never really used it before, but I know it's a great interactive student presentation platform, which by the way, it totally is. I think this would not be the right time to try a new resource. I think keeping it simple means continue to do what we're already doing, what we've already found success in doing, and to give students the similar experience to what they're used to. There are ways to take the analog experience or take the classroom experience and turn it into something digital, but I would be very hesitant to use a brand new resource. One of the things that we are using is 123 apps, 123apps.com. We like it because it's free. It also doesn't require a login, and we're using that to create audio and video clips and then embed those in our lessons to kind of give a more personal touch. But other than using those types of video or audio resources that are very simplistic, we do whatever we can to make technology more of a background resource or something that really, I mean, obviously they have to go to the computer to access it, but it's really more about the instruction and less about the tool that we're using. Otherwise, a student might find themselves disengaged or might find themselves disenfranchised if they're not familiar with that resource, or perhaps they don't have a device that will support it. And regarding teachers, we want teachers to be focused on what they want to focus on, which is their students and learning. And we want the computers to be a means to an end, because if a teacher feels the technology becomes more of an end in and of itself, then it really gets in the way of the efficacy of their actual profession and the reason why they're there in the first place.
That totally makes sense. I think something that in our conversations throughout this whole remote learning process, one thing that has stayed consistent is that, you know, technology is an enablement tool and an enhancement tool, but it shouldn't be getting in the way of instruction. And I think that's something that, you know, will translate back to the classroom once we go back to school, is kind of evaluating which resources truly enhance my lesson and which might not, and might take away time and, you know, quality from the lessons that we're teaching.
Right. One of the norms that I use throughout my different learning activities is I try to focus on this, that the most important resource in the classroom is the teacher, and technically it is the most expensive resource also. So I try to tell teachers that their role in the classroom cannot be replaced by a computer. And first and foremost, their instructional practice is paramount when it comes to making a difference for students. The other side of that, of course, is then they have the ability or the autonomy to use the different resources at their fingertips.
Something that really sparked my interest when you were talking is, it sounds like teachers are maybe asking for more new tools than they really have before, since more teachers are, one, using devices and also looking for tools to help them teach. Do you anticipate having maybe a process in place, or how will you help them once they go back? And kind of, I guess my question is, how are you going to make sure that if it's a tool that they truly want and should be using, that they can, you know, implement that into their classroom once they're back into the normal kind of school process?
Right. Yeah. So I see what you're saying, because it's exciting that we have all these new resources out there and these new opportunities, but then there has to be some sort of triage or some sort of vetting process where we decide which is going to carry forward into the 2020-2021 school year, as opposed to those that, well, that was great, but we're not really going to use it. So one of the things that I mean, I have the benefit of a relatively small faculty with which to work. We have about 70 teachers and about 10 or 15 other professionals that I work with. So about 85 people that I would be communicating with. So what I'll probably do in August is I'll probably engage in some I won't call them that of course, but I'll engage in some focus groups and some semi-structured interviews where we get to sit around and really just talk about how things went. What did we like? What did we not like? And I'll guide them toward resources that our school division or our school district already has access to, because of course that will be more efficient for us and we don't have to go through the bureaucracy of getting new resources approved. But I already have that template in place, because one of the things that I do when I'm working with my faculty and my colleagues is I kind of take two metrics. I take a metric of how effective the teacher's using the technology, in other words, how proficient they are, as opposed to how interested they are. And then based on those two metrics, I kind of categorize teachers into 4 categories. And the purpose of that is to shape the conversation to best meet their needs. If there's someone, for example, who's super interested in technology, but they don't really know that much, or it's all brand new, and by the way, that's my favorite group, then I shape it a little differently than someone who might be super into technology. You know, they know all the stuff and they know everything they're doing, but they're not necessarily open to new ideas. They're not open to trying something new because they believe that they've figured it out. That group of colleagues has a different set of challenges that needs to be addressed. And so in response to the question that you had, what I would probably do is I'll probably engage in that again, just like I do every August. But the conversation will be more about, what did you think of these resources that we tried in the quarantine setting? What were some of the things that worked? What are some of the things that didn't? And then the conversation needs to quickly move away from technology tools and to instructional strategies. What instructional experiences did you have with your students that you want to continue in the school year? What were some of the successes that you had in the digital classroom that you want to make sure continue for the actual classroom? And what were some of the struggles that you had that you want to make sure that we can address? Because as long as we focus on instructional strategies and the reality of the classroom, we can really make sure that we're talking about the right things.
That completely makes sense. And I think bucketing those kind of 4 categories really is a good strategy to help you coach most effectively. Another question about engagement. Is there, or sorry, okay, so I guess recommendations or best practices would you suggest for schedules and balancing synchronous versus asynchronous coursework for remote learning?
Okay, so you're talking about for teachers?
Yes.
Okay, I think what's very important to us as educators is to find a work-life balance. And I'm kind of having that issue right now because we as educators, I mean, we go to class and I'm talking about before quarantine, we go to class and we get there, maybe school starts at 7:30 and it lets out at 2:30, but really we're mentally in the classroom probably about 6:30 when we start driving into work, and then all the way through 8 or 9 o'clock at night because we're grading papers and we're planning and we're reflecting and we're going through all those things. I mean, education is a calling, and it becomes a 20-hour a day profession. And that is very dangerous, of course, to our mental health. And it's important that we be mindful of that. I think the new version of that, or the quarantine version of that, is to make sure that we have a set schedule of synchronous activities and we keep to it. So for example, if you have a class that you have set up using your learning management system or using your audiovisual sharing resource such as Zoom, I think it's important to say, okay, my class is going to be from 11 to 12, or my office hours, as it were, whatever structure we're using, is going to be from 11 to 12. And if someone sends me an email, or if a parent sends me an email about this, I'm going to check my email between 12 and 12:45. And at 12:45 or 1, I'm going to be done. So 11 to 1, and I know that's only 2 hours, but if I tell myself I'm only going to work from 11 to 1, I know that what that means is I'm actually going to work 10 to 2 because I'm not very good at sticking to my own limits. And then regarding asynchronous materials, I think it's very important to be flexible for students. I know that some students, because of their households and because of the work schedules of their parents, may be keeping schedules that are second or third shift schedules. And so I think it's crucial that we give them some extra time to do those asynchronous activities, such as projects or things like that. So especially if they're going to be graded, and I know some school districts are participating in graded assessments, to do this in an asynchronous environment requires some sort of a routine. So, okay, here's the deal, guys. Everything's due at midnight the day of or the day before. And what I usually do is I'll say like 12:05. So there's no, well, is it midnight on the 27th or the 28th? So 12:05, the morning of the 28th, for example, is when this activity is due. But then in terms of the life of a teacher, I would definitely have set hours where I'm doing grading. My role is a little bit different. I do assessments in a very different way because I'm not a classroom teacher, but I have assessment hour, and once, 1 hour or maybe half an hour a day, I'll engage in some of those assessments, because otherwise this grading can really become consuming, as it usually does.
Totally makes sense. In terms of communicating and collaborating with your team of teachers and coaches and the kind of higher level administration team, what strategies have you been using for, engaging, cultivating connections, and kind of making sure that everyone has that community of colleagues to lean on during this time?
Right. So there's 4 domains of shareholders that I try to make sure that I'm thinking of. Not necessarily to frame all my conversations, but it's always in the back of my mind. The first shareholders, of course, being the students and their families, second being the teachers, and third being the administrative vision, and fourth being this realm of educational practice. And so I try to keep best practices in the back of my mind so I can maintain my role as a scholar practitioner and make sure that everything I'm doing is informed by that. So to answer the question, what I'll do is if I have a set of meetings coming up, and usually they're pretty regular. So for example, I might meet with 3 ELA teams and 2 math teams in one day, or I might have a Zoom meeting with an interdisciplinary group talking about ESOL strategies or special education strategies. Before I meet, I always like to try to preemptively figure out what are some of the things that are going to be discussed, and what are some of the agendas help with that. And then more importantly, what my role will be during that conversation. And if there are any opportunities that I foresee where there's going to be administrative questions or questions about policy, what I'll usually do is reach out to the administrative team in advance, because I think it's crucial that there's a common vision and a common message. So I think what I would say is, first and foremost, I'm going to make sure that everything I do speaks to supporting students and works within best practices. But within that realm, I would talk to administration before I meet with the teachers, just to make sure that what I'm discussing makes sense in terms of the larger administrative vision. Otherwise, what happens is I give my opinion, which of course is, well, it's what Sean said. And then it becomes something that can come up later as well. I had a mixed message because one person said this, and I'm getting this email, and that can cause a lot of problems and a lot of grief, and more importantly, can make a teacher feel disenfranchised because they don't feel like they have the whole story. Oh, fourth. So the shareholders are, so I guess maybe I'm using the misnomer. The first three shareholders are the student body, or the students that I'm serving and their families, the professionals with whom I work, so the educators, the colleagues, administrative team, and then the fourth shareholder. In my mind, I view the body of research, or the academy, as a shareholder in and of itself, because the practice that I support feeds into the overall academic structure of the academy. And of course, the other side of that is what we're doing is informed by educational practice. So I'm answering the question in the chat, what was the fourth shareholder? And I know that it's not technically a group of people, but if you think about it, of course, behind every academic research and behind every paper, there is a team of researchers and a team of educators. So I view the academy as the fourth shareholder.
Hey, Sean, it's Brett. Are you out there? Can you hear me?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. There we go. I think is maybe Tiara's having. There you are.
Sorry, my internet has been one of the biggest challenges for me during this remote work process. So I cut out for a second, but it should be better now.
Well, good to see you, Tara. So I'd answered the question in the chat. I hope that was picked up.
Yes, it's still recording, so I got all of that. I was able to hear you. I just unfortunately was disconnected. So kind of that alignment throughout the whole district and team. One question we received was in relation to district level instructional technology coach, and they were asking how can they offer support and personalized learning and tech professional development to teachers in her district during this time of remote learning.
Awesome. And that's from a district level, right? So not a building level, but a district level?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great question. I'm very excited that someone at the district level is asking that question. We also, in my district, we have the benefit of district leadership that really stays focused on the boots on the ground and really supports everyone in that chain. And I think that's extremely valuable. I have colleagues in other divisions that don't have that benefit. And thank you for that, because on behalf of us and behalf of the teachers, we really appreciate it. So to answer the question, I think it's absolutely important that what you're doing is efficient. And I know that we're supposed to say that effectiveness is before efficiency, and it is, but when you're dealing with an entire district and the learning of an entire district, I think efficiency will help, because what it does is it provides you with more time to answer individual concerns, because the overall PD and training is already preset. So for the sake of efficiency, this is the first thing that I would do. I would work with your district, and I would determine, based on the administrative vision or based on the vision for your remote learning context. In other words, when are teachers going to meet with students? How's it going to work? What type of resources are available? I would definitely set up an implementation plan, and I actually have an implementation plan for my division that I set up for this. And it's really a training plan for my building that focuses on what types of resources they're going to need, what type of routines I'm going to support, and what type of reality or relevance that I'm expecting from the teachers with whom I'm working. Because that way they get an idea of what they can use, how to use it, and then how to fit it within that context. Once I've done that, or once I did that, I went ahead and set up some training sessions, and some of them are set up for me because I just took the stuff that I was already using and put it online, or I created a more blended version of that training. And so what I did was I set up a series of training sessions. I've also set up some times where I'm going to be coaching with teachers individually or in small groups. And then I also have some professional development courses through our learning management system that I have invited some teachers to join, that are more of a reflective process, so they can help them to guide themselves through this, or to really be able to reflect on how they're working in this new context and how things are going. But I think the most important thing, the thing to get you started, is to have that time to put together an implementation plan. And I mean, it's for you, so it's nothing fancy. It's not like this 30-page document that you have to put together. But I would definitely say, you know, a 3 or 4 pager where you've got well, mine has a timeline of when I plan to roll certain things out, or what I anticipate as issues that are going to come up. As I mentioned, the resources and the realities. And the other thing is to keep in mind that when you are doing this, to have built-in time for mitigating circumstances. And I think time management and resource management are your best friends, because once you've got that all set up and once you've got your playing field established, you're working within something that you are comfortable, and you're working within a context that doesn't provide stress for you, because you're anticipating the issues that might rise.
Yeah, I think having kind of that proactive approach makes a lot of sense, especially when you're not sure, you know, what the timeline will be with kind of what's happening. So we had another question come in, which I think is a really interesting question. In relation to video messaging between teachers and students, this person said that they had some districts shutting it down completely, some only allowing group messaging. So do you have any guidance for maybe communicating between teachers and students, or tech coaches to teachers, if that video capability isn't available to you?
Sure. So just to illustrate, so it sounds like maybe Zoom was taken offline, or they're not allowed to use Zoom or something like that. And so the part that you're missing is that interchange. And I understand for safety and security purposes, or for I guess, the protection of students, because you might have third parties logging into Zoom. I know they had some security issues. So that's a very real possibility. And actually, I got a couple of emails from some colleagues in neighboring school districts that had the same situation. So what I'm encouraging people to do is to work within what you have to kind of replicate that experience. And the benefit to students in that teacher-student face-to-face is they get to see their teacher and hear their teacher, which I think is huge. They get to establish that relationship and rapport, and they get to feel heard. And I think those 3 things can be replicated, although less streamlined, without video conferencing. I mentioned 1, 2, 3 apps before, but if you have anything that you're using to create video, and that could even be just your onboard Windows 10 camera, I think creating short video clips talking to your students is huge. I think that is first and foremost going to give yourself the opportunity to reach out to students. Even though you won't hear the response from them, they have the opportunity to gain a response from you, because they get to hear you and they get to see you. I think part of that message, or part of those videos, you should have opportunities for students to respond. So for example, if you're giving a daily message, for example, "Hi, how you doing? Dr. Coffron here, Sean Coffron here. I'm just here to talk to you guys. Remember, we're working on the parts of a volcano." And then talk a little bit about the lesson, maybe hold up some documents that you've shared with them. And then at the end say, "Okay, so here, I want to hear from you guys too. I know that we can't share with one another via video conferencing, but go ahead and, if you're using Google Classroom, respond in Google Classroom, or respond in Canvas or Schoology, or if you're not using any of those, at least set up a Google document, and you can use a bit.ly link to make it a little easier for students to access. So go to bit.ly/volcano lesson and respond, reach out to us and talk to me about how you feel about this lesson. The other thing you can do to mitigate the video conferencing, the second thing that students are really missing, or the third thing, I guess, because if you do that, they have an opportunity to respond. They have the opportunity for rapport. The last thing is hearing about one another and being able to talk to one another. And this can get a little tricky if you're using discussion groups, but I think there are lots of applications out there that can be embedded into the resources that you're already using that allow the opportunity for moderated discussion groups. And I think moderated discussion groups are important, of course, because you want to make sure students are protected and they're keeping their topics on their conversations on topic. But that's the third part that's missing, because if you're not able to video conference with students and they're not able to interact with one another, if you can create some sort of digital version of that by using discussion groups, that will help to mitigate that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think I like the discussion group portion, because I think students still need that student to student interaction, kind of bouncing ideas off each other during this time. So switching gears a little bit to more coaching strategy centered topics. How do you, I guess, differentiate your training for different levels of instruction, say for elementary teachers versus high school teachers, and how does that change maybe during the remote learning period?
Sure. Right. Well, it doesn't change. The way I plan, the way I approach teachers that are elementary teachers versus secondary teachers is still the same way that I approach it now. And there are three ways that can be adjusted. The first thing is elementary teachers may have a different set of resources that are available to them. I know in our school district, elementary schools do have a very different platform that they're using. We're all using the same learning management system, but they have different hardware and they have different hardware concerns. They might be using iPads, whereas we might be using tablets or laptops, and there may be other concerns as well. So the first and foremost thing is, okay, so I need to make sure I'm speaking their language. Now, I am more familiar with secondary, so for me, it's switching over when I'm talking to elementary school teachers. But the opposite might also be true if you're more familiar with elementary. So to prep for that, I had to make sure that I'm very familiar with what they have available to them and what their technology landscape looks like. The second thing to consider, of course, is pedagogy, because you want to make sure that you're speaking to people about the students that they're going to be serving. I'm going to be talking to 10th and 11th graders in a much different way and using different language than I would with second and third graders. Also, student engagement looks a little different, and a lot of different instructional strategies, of course, are going to be altered because of the age and the developmental stage of the students. So it's important that even if the topic is the same, the method of which it is implemented or the way it's shown in the digital classroom, in this case, is going to be very different because the elementary students have very different needs. And the third thing is, and I think this is important also, I find that there are certain attributes of elementary school teachers, the way they collaborate and the way they communicate might be different than high school because of the structure of the course or the structure of the school. So for example, in elementary school, I find that it's a lot more interdisciplinary in nature because you have a third grade team meeting and they teach all subjects. Whereas in the high school setting and in most middle school settings, you'll have a teacher that's a math teacher or a teacher who is a science teacher, and they are focused on that specific discipline. And I'm not saying that, well, there are stereotypes. I'm not saying to promote the stereotypical differences between elementary and secondary teachers. Rather, what I'm proposing is because of the nature of the profession, their approach to instruction is going to be different if they're an interdisciplinary educator versus an educator that focuses on a specific discipline.
That makes a lot of sense. I like the differentiation approach. And I think that topic of differentiation has become even more talked about now in terms of differentiating instruction for teachers, but also for students. Another question kind of on the coaching thread is, are you modeling digital lessons for teachers? And if so, how are you modeling digital lessons?
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to model digital learning practices is to employ digital learning practices in my training and my professional development settings. In a lot of coaching sessions, they're usually follow-ups from a training or follow-ups from a professional development experience. And so what I will do is I will reference what I had done in a previous training or PD. If I don't have the benefit of that, I will definitely make reference to it. So for example, if we're talking about BrainPop is another resource that some teachers will use. So if we're talking about how to use BrainPop effectively, and let's say we're having a coaching session on, and I just had the coaching session yesterday, a teacher was talking to me about how to get students engaged in BrainPop if they don't necessarily have their account access, and then how to embed some of those resources in their learning management system. And so one of the things we talked about was, well, what is your overall goal? And we went through the process of, using deeper learning strategies to make sure that we're talking about the same thing and that we're really addressing the teacher's needs. But then when I went into talking about how to use these resources, I made reference to a training that I had given on incorporating digital resources into a lesson. And that way, what I was able to do was I was able to kind of model the structure of that digital lesson as we are here in a digital learning setting. But I think modeling it through the activity itself really makes it more efficient and more authentic. I use the GROW model when I'm engaging in coaching, and part of that is to make sure that the teacher feels that their reality is heard. There is an artificial way to do that, to say, okay, now we're going to talk about your reality, and then they spew forth all this, and that's extremely as ineffective as it sounds. So I think it's better to kind of have a more embedded approach, but really to make sure that I've given the teacher that opportunity to reflect and to share their experience, allows them to, first of all, feel like the conversation is going to be relevant to them, and also to feel like they're being heard. And the best way to do that is to model the practices that I'm talking about when I talk to the audience, or when I talk to the group of people, or in a coaching setting when I'm talking to that specific teacher.
It's like a remote learning inception, kind of.
Yeah. I'll have to share that with the kids. My two are huge Inception fans.
So another question, how do you best encourage teachers to try new approaches for online learning, kind of outside of the box of what you're coaching them to do?
Sure. So the first thing, just to differentiate in the question, I'm going to kind of model, I'm going to tweak the question a little bit, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't like to do outside of the box in terms of technology, because I like to keep things simple, and I know that's kind of skirting the issue. But if we're referring to out of the box instructional strategies, I would absolutely encourage this. And I begin by talking about their reality. So we talk about the goal for the lesson. So what do you want the students to gain from this? And then we take a little reality check and say, well, these are the goals that you have, and this is what you have planned for your students. The reality is you don't have access to the same things that you might be familiar with. So how is it that you would go ahead and replicate that or enhance your learning activity for your students? And then we start with what they would like to do. So rather than starting by, you know what, this project-based learning thing is fantastic, you're going to love it, it's going to be great, it's going to revolutionize everything you've ever thought about learning. Well, if I start that way, what's going to happen about 3 minutes into the conversation is the teacher goes, wait, you said you're going to revolutionize everything? I didn't ask for that. I don't want that. I'm a little concerned. But instead, if I start with the teacher telling me what their goal is going to be, and then talking about what their restrictions are that prevent them from reaching that goal, then the out-of-the-box thinking really becomes their thinking, because I'm guiding them through the process of finding strategies that will remove those restrictions to help them meet their goals. All I become is a vessel for their own critical thinking, and then the out-of-the-box thinking is completely and 100% theirs.
That's really interesting, kind of leveraging them to get to the answer and you just kind of holding their hand on the way there. So then that's kind of all of the questions we had. I guess to wrap it up, what is like the biggest piece of advice or biggest lesson you could share with the audience as to how to be effective with communication and collaboration during this time, from a tech coach perspective?
Okay. I think the most important thing to do is to take a lesson from mindfulness. I practice mindfulness, and there's a mindfulness meditation piece to this too, which we won't get into, but I think there's some specific strategies that are crucial in being mindful, and I think they are 100% applicable to what we're discussing today. I think the first strategy is to be present, to actually give yourself the opportunity or give yourself the gift of having 100% focus on the moment. Because now we have the benefit of not having professional distractions, but we have the opportunity to really focus in on what we're doing despite any personal distractions or distractions we have in our household. I think being present and allowing yourself the opportunity to focus in really on the conversation and reaching out to that person, the other person on the other end of that digital line, really is very, it's very important. I wouldn't want to say it's critical, but I kind of do want to say it's critical. I don't want to say it's critical because it could be that you don't have the opportunity to reach out to them. You might have to reach out to them over email. It might be that you have to have a different way to communicate. But regardless of the communication strategy, it is essential that you are able to be present in the moment and really focus on that person and focus on your role in making that person's life better. The other strategy that I would advise is to constantly be in reflection, to constantly have a routine built into your day for reflective practice. And that could be a journal that you keep, a quarantine journal, I guess is the new thing, or a COVID journal, but it could fulfill the same role as, you know, having a page that you write before you leave the traditional workday. Or if you're one of those people who likes to talk or is a verbal reflector, having a tape recorder, oh boy, that's my age. Excuse me. What I meant to say was have a mobile device or a cell phone where you can record yourself, but have that ability to record your thoughts as you're driving home or as you're on your way home. Because what that does is, first of all, it gives you a space to talk, a space to share with yourself, but it also gives you a sense of permanence. It gives you value to your reflective practice. Whereas if you're just sitting there pontificating and thinking about how things were, there's really no sense of importance because, well, that was reflective and that was nice, but there's nothing to go back on. Whereas if you're keeping a record, whether it's an oral record or whether it's a written record, it gives some more permanence to that reflective space. And also then you can use it later when you're reflecting on your week or reflecting on the school year in general. I keep a journal, and at the end of the school year, when I'm planning for the following year, I go through and I look for different pockets of time where I wasn't as efficacious as I could have been, or I wasn't as focused as I could have been, and maybe I made some professional judgments that I wouldn't make again, but they're usually temporal. So I find that for me, for example, my low point is late October, and I know this because I go through my journal at the end of the school year and find that in late October, I have a little bit more stress in my life. And that's the value of that reflective practice and that long-term documented reflective practice. And the third thing that I would encourage people to do, and this is above all else, because it enforces the others, is to take care of yourself, to engage in self-care. You're at home right now, and you don't have to worry about the office politics or the water cooler stuff, and you don't have to worry about all these kids in the hallways. What I meant to say was, the benefit of all these wonderful children who love learning, and they're always in the hallways to shake your hand and smile and say, thank you so much for being here, Mr. Coffron. We really love school. So all those distractions and all those things that might cause some background stress are no longer there. But please don't denigrate the fact that there's still stuff that might be distracting, still things that are causing you to become less than who you are, and they might still tax you. And so take that time for self-care and take that time to intentionally take care of what's important to you, so that when another person calls on you as a coach, whether it be a learning coach or technology coach or mom or dad, you have a filled cup. You have the ability to give to others because you've given yourself the opportunity to refill.
I think those are great pieces of advice that are really applicable to, anyone working in this remote environment right now, especially the reflection portion. I think this is a great time for everyone to kind of take a step back, see what you were doing prior to this that maybe you've cut out that is improving your workflow, what you're doing now that, might not benefit you when you go back, and kind of use this as almost a reset and reflection to improve yourself and your kind of working habits and workflow once you return to the new normal, as I'm sure it will be post-quarantine. Any kind of last words you want to say before we wrap this up? Anything you have coming up or kind of last words for the audience?
Well, I've really appreciated this opportunity to chat with everyone. Feel free to reach out. I know there were some people that reached out to me as a result of our discussion earlier this month, and I've gotten back to most of you. There are some people that I haven't had a chance to reach out to yet, and I apologize for the delay. If you're online listening or whatever, I'll hopefully get back to you soon. But I really like this opportunity to reach out to colleagues across the nation and some internationally as well. And I want to thank Dyknow for the opportunity, because this type of staying connected is crucial in this time period. But I think we will also see the benefits of this level of connectivity or this level of community far into the next school year as we continue those relationships.
Definitely. And we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I think your insight has been truly beneficial to everyone who's listened. And I'm really glad to hear that people are reaching out to you. So thank you so much for participating in this breakout session. For everyone who is joining us, we hope you learned a lot. Feel free to reach out to Sean or myself or Brett with any questions. And we will put this recording in the Facebook group later this afternoon. Sean, thank you so much again. We'll be in touch soon. We hope to do more work with you in the future because you've been a really great contributor and had amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see everyone next time. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye.